The Grand Meridian Hotel was the kind of place where regular people only saw in movies. Crystal chandeliers hung from ceilings that seemed to touch the sky. The floors were so polished you could see your own reflection in them. And on this particular Saturday night, the hotel was hosting one of the biggest charity events of the year. The man behind this event was Raymond Holt. He was 54 years old, and according to every business magazine in the country, he was worth over $3 billion. He had made his fortune in technology, selling software to companies all over the world, but money had changed him. Or maybe it had just revealed who he really was all along. Raymond sat at the center table with his closest friends and business partners. They were all rich. They were all powerful. And they all laughed a little too loud at jokes that were not really funny. Raymond loved being the center of attention. He loved the way people looked at him when he walked into a room. He loved the fear in the eyes of those who worked for him. Tonight, he was in an especially good mood. The charity gala was a success. Reporters were taking his pictures. Important people were shaking his hand. Everything was going exactly the way he wanted. But not everyone in that room was having a good night. In the corner of the grand ballroom, a young woman named Mira was trying her best to stay invisible. She was 27 years old, with dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She wore the standard black and white uniform of the hotel staff. Her job was simple: carry trays, serve drinks, smile politely, do not speak unless spoken to. Mira had been working at the hotel for almost 2 years now. It was not her dream job. Far from it. But dreams were a luxury she could no longer afford. Back in her home country of Ukraine, Mira had been someone completely different. She had grown up surrounded by music. Her father was a piano teacher, and her mother sang in the local church choir. By the time Mira was 6 years old, she was already playing Beethoven. By the time she was 12, she had won national competitions. At 18, she was accepted into one of the most respected music schools in all of Europe. Everyone said she had a gift. Everyone said she was going to be famous one day. But life does not always care about gifts or dreams. When Mira was 23, her father passed away suddenly from a heart attack. It broke something inside her. He had been her teacher, her mentor, her biggest supporter. Without him, the music felt empty. She stopped playing for months. Then, just when she thought things could not get worse, her mother got sick. The doctor said she needed a liver transplant. The surgery was expensive, and the waiting list in Ukraine was long. Too long. Mira made the hardest decision of her life. She sold everything she owned, packed 2 suitcases, and moved to America with her mother. She had heard that the medical care was better here. She had heard there was more hope. What she did not expect was how hard it would be to start over. Her music degree meant nothing in this new country. Her awards and certificates did not pay the bills, so she took the only job she could find. She became a waitress. For 3 years now, Mira had not touched a piano. Every time she saw one, her heart ached. It reminded her of her father. It reminded her of everything she had lost. So she stayed away. She buried that part of herself deep inside and focused on surviving. Tonight, she was assigned to serve the VIP section. That meant serving Raymond Holt and his wealthy friends. Mira walked carefully between the tables, balancing a tray of champagne glasses. The room was crowded, and she had to move slowly to avoid bumping into anyone. She kept her eyes down, trying not to draw attention to herself. But then, something went wrong. As she passed by the grand piano that sat in the corner of the room, her elbow lightly brushed against its polished surface. It was nothing. Just a tiny touch. The piano did not move. Nothing fell. No harm was done, but Raymond Holt saw it. He had been watching her, the way a cat watches a mouse. And now, he had found his entertainment for the evening. "Hey, you!" he called out loudly. His voice cut through the chatter of the room. Several guests turned to look. Mira froze. Her heart began to pound. "Yes, you, the waitress. Come here." She walked over slowly, her tray trembling slightly in her hands. She stood before his table, surrounded by wealthy strangers who looked at her like she was something stuck to the bottom of their expensive shoes. Do you have any idea what that piano is worth? Raymond asked. His tone was mocking, almost playful. But there was cruelty underneath it. Mira shook her head. I am sorry, sir. I barely touched it. I did not mean to. That piano, Raymond interrupted, is a Steinway. Handcrafted. One of the finest instruments in the world. It costs more than you will earn in your entire lifetime. A few of his friends chuckled. One woman covered her mouth, pretending to hide her smile. Mira felt her face grow hot. She wanted to disappear. She wanted to run away and never come back. But she could not afford to lose this job. Her mother needed her. I am very sorry, she said quietly. It will not happen again. But Raymond was not done. He leaned back in his chair, swirling the wine in his glass. A slow, cruel smile spread across his face. He was enjoying this. Tell you what, he said, loud enough for everyone around to hear. Since you seem so interested in that piano, why do you not play something for us? The guests at his table laughed again. A few people from other tables started to look over, curious about the commotion. Mira felt her stomach drop. Sir, I am just here to serve drinks. I do not. Oh, come on, Raymond said, waving his hand dismissively. It will be fun. Play us a little song. Any song. If you can actually play something decent, I will give you $1,000. Cash. Right here, right now. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick stack of bills, waving them in the air like a trophy. But, he continued, his smile turning cold, if you embarrass yourself, if you cannot play at all, then you are fired. On the spot. No second chances. The room had grown quiet now. People were watching, waiting. Some looked uncomfortable. Others looked entertained. But no one spoke up. No one told Raymond to stop. Mira stood there, feeling smaller than she had ever felt in her life. This man did not know her. He did not know what she had been through. He did not know that music had once been her entire world. To him, she was nothing but a poor waitress to make fun of. She thought about walking away. She thought about apologizing again and returning to her work. It was the safe choice. The smart choice. But something inside her refused to back down. Maybe it was the memory of her father. Maybe it was the years of silence and grief that had built up inside her. Maybe it was the look in Raymond's eyes, so sure that she was beneath him. Whatever it was, it made her do something that shocked everyone in that room. She set down her tray. She looked Raymond straight in the eyes. And she said, I will play. The words hung in the air like smoke. I will play. 3 simple words that changed everything. Raymond Holt blinked. For just a moment, the smug smile on his face flickered. He had not expected her to accept. He had expected her to stammer, apologize, maybe even cry. That was the reaction he wanted. That was what made these little games fun for him. But this waitress, this nobody in a cheap uniform, had just called his bluff. He recovered quickly, of course. Men like Raymond always do. He leaned back in his chair and spread his arms wide, playing to the crowd that had now gathered around. Well, well, he said loudly. It looks like we have a brave one tonight. Everyone, give the lady some room. She is about to perform for us. A ripple of nervous laughter passed through the guests. Some pulled out their phones, ready to record. Others whispered to each other behind their hands. The air in the room felt electric, charged with the promise of either a miracle or a disaster. Mira stood completely still. Her heart was beating so fast she could hear it in her ears. What had she done? Why did she say yes? She had not played piano in 3 years. 3 long, painful years. What if her fingers had forgotten? What if she sat down and nothing came out? But it was too late to turn back now. Everyone was watching. Everyone was waiting. She took a slow breath and began walking toward the piano. The Steinway Grand sat in the corner of the ballroom like a sleeping giant. Its black surface gleamed under the chandelier lights. It was beautiful. It was terrifying. It was everything Mira had been running from. As she walked, memories flooded her mind. She remembered being 5 years old, sitting on her father's lap while he showed her the keys. She remembered the smell of his cologne, the sound of his laughter when she played her first scale correctly. She remembered how proud he looked when she won her first competition at age 10. He had lifted her up in his arms and spun her around, telling her she was going to change the world with her music. But then she remembered other things too. She remembered the hospital room where he took his last breath. She remembered the silence that followed. A silence so heavy, it nearly crushed her. She remembered packing away all his music books, because she could not bear to look at them anymore. For 3 years, she had told herself that chapter of her life was over. Music belonged to the past, to a version of herself that no longer existed. And yet, here she was, walking toward a piano, about to play in front of hundreds of strangers. The crowd parted as she approached. She could feel their eyes on her, judging her, doubting her. She heard a woman whisper, "This is going to be embarrassing." She heard a man chuckle and say, "Poor thing does not know what she is getting into." Mira ignored them. She had learned long ago that other people's opinions could only hurt you if you let them. She reached the piano and stopped. For a long moment, she just stood there, looking at it. The keys were so clean, so perfect. 88 of them, waiting in silence. Behind her, Raymond called out, "Any day now, sweetheart. We do not have all night." More laughter from the crowd. Mira closed her eyes. She thought about her mother, lying in a hospital bed just 20 miles away. She thought about the bills piling up on her kitchen table. She thought about all the nights she had cried herself to sleep, wondering if things would ever get better. And then she thought about her father. She could almost hear his voice in her head, soft and warm like it always was. "Do not be afraid, little one. The music is still inside you. It never left." She opened her eyes. Slowly, carefully, she pulled out the bench and sat down. The leather was cool against her legs. She adjusted her position, finding the right distance from the keys. It was muscle memory, something her body remembered even after all this time. The room had gone completely silent now. Even the waiters had stopped moving. Everyone was watching the small woman in the black and white uniform, sitting alone at the grand piano. Raymond leaned forward in his chair, his phone raised and ready to record. He was certain this was going to be a disaster. He was already imagining how many views the video would get online. Waitress humiliates herself at Billionaire's party. It would be hilarious. But something strange happened. As Mira placed her fingers on the keys, a calm washed over her. The noise of the crowd faded away. The pressure, the fear, the doubt. It all disappeared. In that moment, it was just her and the piano. Just like it used to be. She thought about what to play. She could choose something simple, something safe, a popular song that everyone would recognize. That would be the easy way out. But Mira had never taken the easy way out. Not when she left her home country. Not when she worked double shifts to pay for her mother's medicine. And not now. She decided to play Chopin. Specifically, his Ballade No. 1-inch G minor. It was one of the most difficult pieces in classical piano. It required not just technical skill, but deep emotion. It was the piece she had performed at her final concert in Ukraine 3 years ago, just 2 weeks before her father died. She had not played it since. Her hands trembled slightly as they hovered over the keys. Could she still do this? Could she remember all the notes, all the movements, all the feelings? There was only one way to find out. She pressed the first key. A single note rang out, clear and pure. It echoed through the silent ballroom like a bell. Then another note. And another. The opening of the ballade is slow and haunting. It creeps into your soul like a whisper. Mira played those first few measures carefully, feeling her way back into the music like someone walking through a dark room they once knew by heart. And then something magical happened. Her fingers began to remember. Not just the notes, but the feeling behind them. The joy, the sorrow, the love. It all came rushing back like a river breaking through a dam. She played faster now, more confidently. Her body swayed gently with the music. Her eyes closed again. But this time, not from fear. This time, from complete surrender. The guests in the ballroom stood frozen. The smiles had faded from their faces. The phones that had been raised to mock her were now recording something else entirely. Something none of them had expected. Raymond Holt sat motionless in his chair. His mouth had fallen open slightly. The stack of money still sat on the table in front of him. Forgotten. This was not possible. This waitress, this woman he had tried to humiliate, was playing like a professional. No, not just a professional. She was playing like a master. The music filled every corner of the room. It reached up to the crystal chandeliers and down to the polished floors. It wrapped around every person present. Whether they wanted it to or not, some guests felt tears forming in their eyes, and they did not even know why. Others felt a strange tightness in their chest, a feeling they could not name. The music was doing something to them. It was waking up emotions they had buried long ago, and Mira, lost in the melody, was no longer a waitress. She was exactly who she had always been, a musician. The music poured out of Mira like water from a broken dam. 3 years of silence, 3 years of grief, 3 years of pretending that part of her was dead. All of it came rushing out through her fingers, through the keys, through the strings of that beautiful Steinway piano. She was no longer in the ballroom of the Grand Meridian Hotel. She was somewhere else entirely. She was back in Ukraine, in the small apartment where she grew up. She was sitting next to her father on the old wooden bench, listening to him explain why Chopin wrote this piece. He had told her it was about longing, about loss, about finding beauty in sadness. She had not understood it then. She was too young. But now, after everything she had been through, she understood it completely. The ballade moved into its faster sections, and Mira's hands flew across the keys with a speed that seemed almost impossible. Her fingers knew exactly where to go, what to do, how hard to press. It was like riding a bicycle. You never truly forget. The music lives in your bones. In the audience, people had stopped breathing. At least, that is what it felt like. The room was so silent. You could hear the soft creak of the piano pedals under Mira's feet. You could hear the gentle hum of the strings vibrating inside the instrument. You could hear your own heartbeat. A woman near the front of the crowd had tears streaming down her face. She did not even bother to wipe them away. She just stood there, clutching her champagne glass, completely lost in the music. A man in his 60s, a retired judge who thought he had seen everything in life, felt something stir inside his chest. It was a feeling he had not experienced in decades. It reminded him of his youth, of dreams he had abandoned long ago, of a version of himself he had almost forgotten existed. Even the hotel staff had gathered at the edges of the room. Waiters stood with their trays hanging at their sides. Kitchen workers peeked through the service doors. The head chef, a large man with a thick beard, wiped his eyes with the back of his hand and hoped no one noticed. This was not just a performance. This was something else, something rare, something that only happens once in a lifetime, if you are lucky. At his table, Raymond Holt sat completely frozen. The smug expression that had lived on his face all evening was gone. In its place was something he rarely felt: confusion, disbelief, and underneath it all, the first small seeds of shame. He had been so sure, so absolutely certain that this woman would fail. He had wanted to laugh at her. He had wanted to show everyone how clever he was, how powerful, how untouchable. Instead, he had done the opposite. He had given her a stage. He had given her an audience. He had given her the chance to show the world who she really was. And who she really was, it turned out, was extraordinary. Raymond's wife, an elegant woman named Catherine, sat beside him with her arms crossed. She had always tolerated her husband's cruel jokes and petty games. She had told herself it was just how powerful men behaved. But tonight, something had shifted inside her. watching this young waitress pour her soul into the piano, watching the tears in the eyes of everyone around her. Catherine felt sick to her stomach. She looked at her husband, really looked at him, maybe for the first time in years, and she did not like what she saw. The ballade reached its emotional peak. This was the part that separated good pianists from great ones. The notes came faster and faster, building like a storm. Mira's entire body moved with the music now. Her shoulders, her head, her back. She was not just playing the piano, she was becoming the piano. The melody climbed higher and higher, reaching for something just out of grasp. It was desperate, and beautiful, and heartbreaking all at once. And then, just when it seemed like it could not possibly go any further, Mira brought it all crashing down. The final chords rang out through the ballroom. They were powerful and heavy, like the closing of a great door, like the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. And then there was silence. Complete, absolute silence. Mira sat at the piano with her eyes still closed. Her chest rose and fell with heavy breaths. Her fingers rested gently on the keys, as if she was not quite ready to let go. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but she did not seem to notice. She was still somewhere far away, still lost in the world the music had created. For 3 full seconds, no one moved. No one spoke. It was as if the entire room had forgotten how to breathe. Then, from somewhere in the back, a single person started clapping. It was slow at first, just one pair of hands, breaking the silence like a crack in ice. But then another person joined in, and another, and another. Within moments, the entire ballroom had erupted into applause. Not polite, golf clap applause. Real applause. The kind that comes from deep in your chest. The kind that says, "I just witnessed something I will never forget." People rose to their feet. First a few, then dozens, then everyone. A standing ovation in a room full of billionaires and celebrities. All of them cheering for a woman who had served them drinks just 10 minutes ago. "Brava!" someone shouted. "Incredible!" yelled another. "Who is she?" people whispered to each other. "Where did she come from?" Mira finally opened her eyes. She looked out at the crowd, at all those wealthy, powerful people standing and clapping for her, and she could not quite believe what she was seeing. This morning, she had woken up at 5 in the morning to take a double shift. She had worried about whether she could afford her mother's medication this month. She had felt invisible, forgotten, worthless, and now this. She stood up slowly from the piano bench. Her legs felt weak, like they might give out at any moment. She did not know what to do with her hands, so she just clasped them in front of her and gave a small, awkward bow. The applause grew even louder. From across the room, a man began pushing his way through the crowd. He was in his late 40s, with gray hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. His name was Vincent Chen, and he was one of the most respected music producers in the country. He had discovered some of the greatest classical musicians of the past 2 decades. He had attended tonight's gala expecting nothing but boring small talk and mediocre wine. He had not expected to discover a star. Vincent reached the piano and stood before Mira. The crowd quieted down, sensing that something important was about to happen. "Young lady," Vincent said, his voice thick with emotion, "I have been in the music industry for over 30 years. I have heard thousands of pianists, professionals, prodigies, masters." He paused and shook his head slowly. "I have never heard anyone play like that." Mira did not know what to say. Her English was good, but in this moment, words seemed impossible. She just stared at him, still trembling from the performance. "What is your name?" Vincent asked. "Mira," she said quietly. "Mira Varga." "Mira," he repeated, as if tasting the name. "Tell me something, Mira. Why are you working as a waitress?" Before she could answer, another voice cut through the air. A voice that had lost all its arrogance. A voice that sounded, for the first time all evening, small. "Yes," Raymond Holt said, rising slowly from his chair. "I think we would all like to know that." Every eye in the room turned to him, and for once in his life, Raymond Holt had absolutely no idea what to say. Raymond Holt stood at his table, and for the first time in as long as anyone could remember, he looked uncertain. The man who always had a clever remark, who always knew how to command a room, who always made others feel small, so he could feel big, that man was gone. In his place stood someone who looked almost lost. The ballroom was silent again. But this silence was different from before. Before, it had been the silence of awe. Now, it was the silence of judgment. Every pair of eyes in that room was fixed on Raymond, waiting to see what he would do next. He cleared his throat. "I asked you a question," he said to Mira, but his voice had none of its usual sharpness. "Why are you working as a waitress?" Mira stood by the piano, still trembling slightly from her performance. She looked at this man who had tried to humiliate her, who had waved money in her face like she was a trained animal, who had been so sure she would fail. She had every right to be angry. She had every right to tell him exactly what she thought of him. But that was not who Mira was. "Because life does not always go the way we plan," she said simply. Her voice was quiet but steady. "I was a pianist in Ukraine. I studied at the conservatory for 12 years. I performed all over Europe. But then my father died. And my mother got very sick. She needed surgery that we could not afford in my country. So I brought her here to America." She paused, looking down at her hands. The same hands that had just created magic on the piano. The same hands that would go back to carrying trays tomorrow. "My degrees mean nothing here," she continued. "My experience means nothing. I needed money to pay for my mother's treatment. So I took the only job I could find. I have not played piano in 3 years. Until tonight." A murmur rippled through the crowd. People exchanged glances. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Others felt a deep sense of shame for having laughed earlier when Raymond mocked her. Vincent Chen, the music producer, stepped closer to Mira. 3 years? He said, his voice filled with wonder. "You have not played in 3 years, and you just performed one of the most difficult pieces in classical piano from memory? Flawlessly?" Mira shrugged slightly. "Music does not leave you. It waits. Even when you try to forget it, it waits." Raymond listened to all of this, and with every word, he felt something heavy growing in his chest. It was an unfamiliar feeling. It took him a moment to recognize it. Guilt. He had spent his entire adult life building walls around his heart. He told himself that emotions were weakness. He told himself that kindness was for fools. He had climbed to the top of the business world by being ruthless, by crushing anyone who got in his way, by never caring about the damage he left behind. But tonight, standing in this ballroom, watching a woman who had lost everything still find the courage to share her gift with the world, something cracked inside him. His wife, Catherine, stood up from her chair. Her face was cold, her eyes hard. She had put up with a lot over the years. The affairs she pretended not to know about. The way he spoke to service workers. The cruel jokes at dinner parties. She had told herself it was the price of the lifestyle they lived. But tonight was different. Tonight, she had watched her husband try to destroy a young woman for his own entertainment. And she had watched that young woman rise above it, in the most beautiful way possible. "Raymond," Catherine said, loud enough for those nearby to hear, "I think you owe this woman an apology." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Several guests gasped quietly. No one spoke to Raymond Holt like that, not even his wife. Raymond looked at Catherine. For a moment, something flashed in his eyes. The old Raymond might have snapped back at her. The old Raymond might have made a joke to deflect, but the old Raymond seemed very far away right now. He turned back to Mira and took a deep breath. "Your wife is right," someone called out from the crowd. It was an older gentleman, a retired senator who had known Raymond for decades. "You treated this young lady terribly. The least you can do is apologize." "Apologize," another voice shouted. "Yes, apologize," echoed someone else. The crowd was turning on him. These were his friends, his business partners, his social circle. And they were all looking at him with something he had never seen before in their eyes. Disappointment. Raymond felt his face grow hot. This was not how tonight was supposed to go. He was supposed to be the star of the gala. He was supposed to be admired, envied, respected. Instead, he was being publicly shamed by a waitress and his own guests. Part of him wanted to fight back. Part of him wanted to remind everyone who he was, how much money he had donated to charity tonight, how much power he held in this city. But when he looked at Mira, standing there with such quiet dignity despite everything he had put her through, the fight drained out of him. He walked slowly toward her. Each step felt heavier than the last. The crowd parted to let him through, watching in silence. When he reached Mira, he stopped. They stood face to face, the billionaire and the waitress, the man who had everything, and the woman who had almost nothing. "I am sorry," Raymond said. The words came out rough, like they had been stuck in his throat for years. Because in a way, they had been. Raymond could not remember the last time he had apologized to anyone. He was not even sure he knew how. "I am sorry for what I said to you tonight," he continued. "I am sorry for trying to embarrass you. I thought it would be funny. I thought—" He stopped, shaking his head. "I do not know what I thought. There is no excuse for how I treated you." Mira looked at him for a long moment. She could see that he was struggling. She could see that this was not easy for him. And despite everything, she felt something unexpected. Compassion. "I forgive you," she said quietly. Raymond blinked. He had not expected that. He had expected anger, coldness, rejection. He had expected her to make him suffer, the way he had tried to make her suffer. But instead, she offered him grace. "You do?" he asked. Mira nodded. "Holding on to anger is like drinking poison and hoping the other person gets sick. My father used to say that. I have been through too much to waste my energy on bitterness." The crowd was watching this exchange with rapt attention. Some people were recording on their phones. Others were whispering to each other. Everyone knew they were witnessing something special. Something that did not happen every day in circles like these. Vincent Chen stepped forward again. "Miss Varga," he said, reaching into his jacket pocket and pulling out a business card. "I meant what I said earlier. I have never heard anyone play like you. The world deserves to hear your music. Please, call me. I want to help you." Mira took the card with shaking hands. She looked at it like it might disappear if she blinked. "I do not know what to say," she whispered. "Say you will think about it," Vincent replied with a warm smile. "That is all I ask." Raymond watched this exchange, and something stirred inside him. A thought. An idea. Maybe even the beginning of something like redemption. "Wait," he said suddenly. Everyone turned to look at him again. "You said your mother needs surgery. A liver transplant, yes?" Mira nodded slowly, unsure where this was going. Raymond reached into his jacket and pulled out his checkbook. The same checkbook he had used to write million-dollar donations that meant nothing to him. The same checkbook that had never once been used to help someone he had personally wronged. "How much?" he asked. Mira stared at him. "What? How much does the surgery cost? The medical bills, all of it. How much?" The ballroom had gone completely silent once more. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. And Mira, who had learned long ago never to expect kindness from strangers, felt the last walls around her heart begin to crack. The question echoed through the silent ballroom. "How much does the surgery cost?" Everyone waited for Mira's answer. Everyone expected her to name a number, to accept the money, to take what she so desperately needed from this man who owed her at least that much. But Mira did not answer right away. She looked at Raymond, at the checkbook in his hands, at the pen he was already uncapping. She thought about her mother lying in that hospital bed. She thought about the bills that kept her awake at night. She thought about how easy it would be to just say yes. But something held her back. Her father had raised her to work for everything she had. He had taught her that dignity was worth more than money. He had shown her, through his own life, that the things we earn mean more than the things we are given. "I cannot accept charity," Mira said finally. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Raymond looked stunned. Even Vincent Chen raised his eyebrows in surprise. "What do you mean?" Raymond asked. "I want to help. After what I did tonight, please, let me do this." Mira shook her head slowly. "I appreciate the offer. I really do. But if I take your money like this, I will always feel like I owed you something. I will always wonder if you did it out of guilt or pity. And I do not want to build my mother's recovery on guilt or pity." Raymond lowered his checkbook, confused. This was not how people usually responded when he offered them money. Most people grabbed whatever they could get. Most people did not care about dignity or pride when survival was at stake, but Mira was not most people. "However," she continued, her voice growing stronger, "I have a different idea. A proposal. If you are willing to hear it." Raymond nodded slowly. "I am listening." "You host charity events like this one several times a year, yes?" Mira asked. "3 or 4 times," Raymond confirmed. "Then let me perform at them. Not as a waitress serving drinks, but as a pianist. I will play at 3 of your events. And in return, you will donate to a foundation that helps immigrant families who cannot afford medical care. Not just for my mother, but for all the others like her. People who came to this country hoping for a better life and found themselves trapped by hospital bills they could never pay." The ballroom was so quiet you could hear the chandeliers humming above. Everyone was staring at Mira with a mixture of shock and admiration. She had just been offered a blank check from a billionaire. And instead of taking it, she had turned it into something bigger, something that could help hundreds of families, maybe thousands. Raymond stood there for a long moment, processing what she had said. He had spent his whole life making deals. He had negotiated contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars. But this was different. This was not about money, or power, or winning. This was about something he had forgotten even existed. Purpose. "You would do that?" he asked quietly. "You would perform for free, just to help strangers?" Mira smiled softly. "They are not strangers to me. They are people like my mother. People like me. People who deserve a chance." Raymond felt something shift inside his chest. It was like a door opening after being locked for decades. He did not fully understand it, but he knew he did not want it to close again. "Deal," he said, extending his hand. Mira shook it firmly. And just like that, in the middle of a charity gala surrounded by hundreds of witnesses, a new partnership was born. The crowd erupted into applause once more. But this time, it was not just for Mira's music. It was for her character. It was for her courage. It was for her heart. 6 months passed. In that time, everything changed. Vincent Chen kept his promise. He introduced Mira to the right people, helped her record a demo, and worked tirelessly to get her name out into the world. The video from the gala had gone viral within days. Millions of people watched the waitress who silenced a billionaire with Chopin. News outlets picked up the story. Interview requests poured in, but Mira stayed focused. She did not let the attention go to her head. She practiced every day, rebuilding the skills she had let go dormant for 3 years. She performed at Raymond's charity events as promised, and each time, she brought the audience to tears. The foundation Raymond created, which Mira helped name the Second Chance Fund, raised over $12 million in its first year. It paid for medical treatments for hundreds of immigrant families. It gave people hope when they had none left, and Mira's mother got her surgery. The transplant was successful. After months of recovery, she was finally healthy again. When she was strong enough to travel, Mira took her to see something special. Carnegie Hall. They stood outside the famous concert venue on a cold winter evening. Snow was falling gently, covering the streets of New York in a soft white blanket. Mira's mother held her daughter's arm, still weak but smiling wider than she had in years. "I cannot believe this is real," her mother whispered, looking up at the building. "My little girl. Performing here." Mira squeezed her hand. "I could not have done it without you, Mama. You gave up everything to give me a chance. Now it is my turn to make you proud." Her mother turned to her with tears in her eyes. "You have always made me proud. From the very first note you ever played. Your father would be so happy right now. I know he is watching. Mira felt her own tears coming but blinked them back. Tonight was not a night for sadness. Tonight was a night for joy. Inside the concert hall, every seat was filled. Over 2,000 people had come to hear Mira play. Critics, musicians, celebrities, and ordinary people who had seen her story online and wanted to witness it in person. Vincent Chen sat in the third row, beaming like a proud father. Raymond Holt sat in the very back, alone. He had not told anyone he was coming. He did not want attention. He just wanted to see, with his own eyes, what his cruelty had accidentally set in motion. Catherine had left him 3 months ago. She said she could not be married to the man he used to be, and she was not sure he had really changed. Raymond did not blame her. He was not sure either. But he was trying. For the first time in his life, he was really trying. The lights dimmed. The audience fell silent. And Mira walked onto the stage. She wore a simple black dress. No jewelry, no fancy accessories. She did not need them. Her presence alone commanded the room. She sat at the piano. A beautiful Steinway just like the one from the gala. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She thought about her father. She thought about her mother sitting in the front row. She thought about all the nights she had cried herself to sleep, wondering if things would ever get better. And then she began to play. The music filled Carnegie Hall like sunlight flooding a dark room. It reached into the hearts of everyone present and touched something deep inside them. Some people cried. Some people smiled. Some just sat in stunned silence, unable to believe what they were hearing. Mira played for her father, who had given her the gift of music. She played for her mother, who had sacrificed everything. She played for the waitress she used to be, and for the woman she had become. When the final note faded into silence, the audience rose as one. The applause was deafening, thunderous, unending. A standing ovation that lasted for nearly 5 minutes. In the back row, Raymond Holt stood and clapped with everyone else. Tears streamed down his face. And he did not bother to hide them. He had spent his whole life chasing money and power, thinking they would make him happy. But watching Mira on that stage, he finally understood what he had been missing all along. It was never about what you have. It was always about what you give. And sometimes, the greatest gifts come from the people we least expect.